How's it going, everybody? This is episode 3 of the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard.
Hello, everyone out there.
All right, and we are wrestling fans, and we are going to be talking to you this week about keeping up with the current product and the current shows that are out there. And this might be something that not everybody that watches this will love some of the things we're saying, but we're going to talk about how we're watching, what we're watching, and how much of it we're watching. And Leonard, why don't you start us off here by telling us, you know, basically everybody should know how big of a wrestling fan you are, but why you might or might not be watching some of the current things.
Right. Yeah, this may be the thing that gets us flamed more than anything is that at current
Well,
time, at the time of this video, I am not really keeping up with the current product much as far as watching it. I'm still reading, news items online. I'm still listening to some different podcasts and things like that. So I'm aware of what's happening in a lot of the current national companies. But I'm not currently really watching the products for two main reasons. Reason one is my living conditions have changed because of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I had DirecTV and I was DVRing everything and watching it in some form, either fast forwarding through it or, having it kind of on in the background, but generally going over everything. And that is, more than 12 hours a week, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor. I was catching New Japan sometimes on Access, and I was watching NWA Power on YouTube. And I love Power, by the way, because of the old school throwback feel of it. I thought that was fantastic. But then when the pandemic hit, I wound up moving in with my girlfriend, who's now my fiance. So that worked out for us. And we don't have cable. We have different streaming services that we use. I do not currently have the WWE Network. I did have it during that time, but I wound up watching older stuff over current stuff because number two reason why I'm not watching a lot of the current product is that it just wasn't engaging me even prior to the pandemic and the change in my living situation, my cable situation. I got to this point where I was initially very excited for AEW and for NWA, but then that kind of faded rather quickly, my excitement for it, and it got to this point where it felt like I had to watch wrestling as opposed to I get to watch wrestling.
Right.
And someone might say, well, why do you think you had to? Well, because I was a wrestling fan. Not only for myself, everyone who knew me knew I was a wrestling fan. And if you're a wrestling
Loyalty.
fan, it's loyalty. You got to watch the product. You got to watch it. Yeah, but more and more, I'm thinking that maybe that's not necessarily due to be a wrestling fan. And there's another tangent that I want to go off of on this. But Chad, I'll let you first kind of talk about how you're keeping up, if you are, and then how you're doing it first.
Well, it's interesting what you say about watching the current product and feeling like you had to keep watching it. And I hadn't really thought about it at all until you just mentioned it. But I do have that feeling sometimes too. Now, for me, growing up, wrestling was always that trusty friend that was there for me. It was always a reliable show. It was on every week, whether it be on Sunday mornings, when I was very young, or Mondays, Thursdays, Fridays, whatever it may be. It was always there. And, there have been times throughout my life where my fandom dipped, specifically, once Hulk Hogan left, I, at that point, was starting to get into my teenage years and everything that goes along with that. So I really wasn't watching wrestling when Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, were leading the charge. But then I got back into it when Stone Cold became popular. And, then when Stone Cold and the Monday Night Wars kind of tapered off, and Batista and John Cena became popular, I would check in here and there, but I really wasn't watching. So there's been times when, I've gone through hills and valleys, so to speak, with it. But I've always felt like I needed to keep it close to me, even though I'm not watching it week in and week out, because of loyalty. And because, as you said, in my, family and friends, I certainly am known as that guy who watches wrestling. And I you probably have more people around you that you can talk about it with. I don't have that many people who I could talk about it with. And, so I've always felt like, even though it's bad, I've always felt this sort of loyalty / obligation to keep watching it, because I feel like if I went to some of my friends and said, oh, I stopped watching wrestling, they'd be, oh, see, you stopped watching that shit, so.
Yeah, like they would win whatever imaginary argument
Right.
that they were having with you.
After all these decades, I won finally. No. So, I mean, I've always watched it, but now, and you had talked about, like, there are so many different shows right now to watch. Like, you could conceivably watch wrestling almost every day of the week, and that would be all you watched was wrestling. And if you are somebody that watches wrestling every single day of the week, from start to finish all the shows, you need to message us and tell us why, because I'm honestly curious. Because
also tell me if you have a girlfriend or a significant other.
I was gonna get there.
And do you have a regular full-time job?
Right.
There are two things.
Absolutely. Well. Because my, as shocking as it may seem, my wife does not watch wrestling. And when I do get her to watch, it's usually after a few beers, and I'm usually watching something old, and I'm like, oh man, you got to see this Randy Savage Ultimate Warrior career-ending match. Watch what happens at the end, So I'll like drag her in, and I remember when I was first. This is a sidebar. We're getting into the weeds, but when I was first dating my wife, she was one of those people who are like, oh, that wrestling, it's just fake stuff. I'm like, okay. Let's watch this Hell in the Cell match between Mick Foley and The Undertaker. And, shortly after that match started, and they were, it was her and her aunt. They were both very taken aback and frightened by what they were watching. Anywho, my wife doesn't watch wrestling, and she doesn't really like to watch wrestling. If I'm watching it, she leaves the room and watches her own thing. So...
Yeah, real quickly, I should also mention my fiance also does not watch wrestling. We have 2 TVs, so I usually watch it on the back TV if I want to. And then sometimes she will come in to get something, and she'll see it and go, "What are you watching?" And again, back when I had the network, it was like Memphis stuff from '87,
right,
or like the ECW Super shows from '93, '94 when they were first starting, and it was just like random older stuff. Although, again, real quick tangent, funny enough, there was one like Saturday afternoon where I was watching out in the living room because she was out, and she came back, and I was watching this like random WCW Saturday nights. And she actually and this was from the early 90s, and she actually got into the Ron Simmons push that they were giving him, that she actually enjoyed, like the fact that he was just being presented as just this, like a nice guy. Like there was this segment where he like went and got a bunch of underprivileged children and took them to the wrestling matches, and she loved that. So she works with children, I should say. So that's one reason why. But that again, just to mention, yes, my significant other isn't into wrestling either, but she's great, loves that I do. She's cool with it, and she thinks it's great that we're doing this show.
And that's great. And, that's really what you want to look for. And, it's, from what I've heard, it's a rarity. If you're a huge wrestling fanatic and you're able to find somebody that puts up with it and tolerates it, if you could find that person, certainly hold on to them, because, wrestling fans are crazy and, often weird. But, early on, I was able to show her full matches, and like, it would be my favorite matches. I mentioned one with the Randy Savage Ultimate Warrior match at WrestleMania 7. And so I would show her, I'm like, okay, hey, just watch this with me, and hey, she would watch a match with me, and then ultimately I would have to watch something that she wanted to watch. But now it's very rare if I get her to watch a full match. Like the show that she will get into is the Royal Rumble, because that tends to be more of an event in the house. Yeah. Like I'll get friends involved and like, that kind of thing. And, so she'll, usually be doing other things, but she'll sit in the room and watch that with us. But, if other than that, I'll get her to watch a clip here or there. Like, oh man, you got to see this pop that Steve Austin got when he came out on Raw, little stuff like that. I'll get her to watch, and she'll fake excitement and then walk away. And so, how I usually watch it now is Mondays are usually my night that I'll have wrestling on. Now, I have 3 kids, so, we're doing work often well after Raw has already started. It's a 3-hour show. So I will usually put that on in the background. I'll tune in and out of it. And, if it's something I want to watch, I'll sit down, I'll watch it, but I'll multitask while it's on. I'll be honest. It does not hold my attention like a Raw from the late 90s to early 2000s would. That's just the way the product is, because as Leonard said, the product is not as engaging now. And you know what? Obviously, COVID has affected a lot of things, but this doesn't have anything to do with that. The product wasn't very engaging before COVID. And there are a lot of reasons for that. They don't really have any huge stars that, you really tune in to see, aside from, when Lesnar was there, I would watch pretty much everything that he did, because I thought he was an attraction that I wanted to see. But other than that, they really don't have any like really money-making stars that you're like, okay, I have to tune in just to see what happens with, this person. Now, other than that, if it's a really special match on NXT, I might check that out after the fact. Very rarely do I watch NXT live. SmackDown, being that it's on Fridays, I really don't watch SmackDown on Fridays, because Fridays is the beginning of the weekend, and I'm just not in a wrestling mode on Fridays. I don't know why that is, but it's just not, even, it's great that they're on Fox, but I very rarely do I watch SmackDown. And so this will kind of get into how else people watch it. And, anybody that watches this, please let us know how you keep up with the current product in your own way. Do you DVR it and fast forward? You listen to some of the podcasts, the popular podcasts that Conrad Thompson, hosts. He will even say on some of his shows that he doesn't watch every single wrestling show from start to finish. Like, he'll record it and he'll fast forward through and watch what he wants to watch. Now, I don't have DVR like Leonard. I have a streaming sticks, so I'll watch clips on Instagram. If something big happens, and if it's a show that I missed, I'll see the clip on Instagram. If I really need to watch a full segment, I'll either find it on Hulu or I'll find it on YouTube, and I'll watch it that way. We know a lot of people from 411 who, write about these shows. And so to an extent, even though obviously all those guys are really big wrestling fans, that's part of their work, is reviewing these shows and watching them from start to finish. When they don't have to review those shows, I wonder how avid of viewers they are of some of these shows, because I do feel like the ratings indicate that not as many people watch the product now as they once did. I mean, if you look in the height of the Monday Night Wars, I mean, the ratings were anywhere from, 4 to, high 5.9s. So many people were watching, many millions of people were watching. Whereas now, if you look at the Raw ratings, they'll be anywhere from 1.6 million viewers to maybe low 2 million viewers. And SmackDown gets around 1.7 million viewers to 2.2 or so. Don't quote me, but that's the range. So Leonard, what do you think that the declining ratings are a reflection of the quality of the product, or do you think that it's maybe also a little bit of the fact that people are consuming the product in different ways now? They're not necessarily, it's Monday, it's 8, I need to watch wrestling. You think maybe they're watching it and getting it, they're fixing other ways?
I think it's a little bit of both, plus just the cycle of it. If you go back and you look through the years, it's up, it's down. It's just the way it is. But especially right now today, I think the urge to watch it live, or especially like during the Attitude Era, like you had to watch it live and you had to flip back and forth between Nitro and Raw and see who was doing what and all this stuff. Like, it was an event, it was an experience. Nowadays, it's just like another show that you watch. So, and people with any show hardly watches anything live, especially if you're talking about things on streaming services like your Netflix or Hulu that aren't live, like their original shows. You can watch it whenever you want. So I think that's part of it as well. But I also think that the wrestling fan base probably isn't as big as it was, say, during the Attitude Era or maybe even 5 years ago. So I think it's just a mix of a lot of things. But I definitely think those who are still keeping up with the current product are watching it in different ways and at different times and keeping up with it in different ways rather than the old traditional, I have to watch it all and I have to watch it live.
And you know what? It's interesting. I had mentioned COVID, and I do think it is worth noting that, amidst a pandemic where a lot of people have been stuck at home, the ratings for these shows have gone down. People are in their house and yet they're not watching. And, one of those reasons, obviously, is because we now know just how crucial the live crowd is to a wrestling show and how important that atmosphere is. And, I think you combine that with the fact that the product right now is not as, enthralling as it once was. And you have people saying to themselves, and I'm just going to check out something else, or I'll read about it online. I'll read the report online, or, I'll see, there's the WWE still does This Week in WWE, which you could see, in, a short frame of time, just basically everything that has happened. And it doesn't, a lot of times it just doesn't have that must see feel. And, there is so much wrestling out there to consume. You think about like all the shows, there's Raw, 205 Live, there's SmackDown, there's Main Event, there's NXT, there's NXT UK, there's AEW, there's AEW Dark, there's Impact Wrestling. When NWA Power was around, there was that. There's, when Ring of Honor. And then if you really get into some of those indie companies, there's all that stuff. New Japan Pro Wrestling, all that stuff. There's so much wrestling out there.
Yeah, there was a short time where I was watching like NWA Hollywood, I believe it was. It was on some random cable channel that was like way up there on the dial, but I randomly found it one day and started watching it.
Yeah, and we were talking before this, you had mentioned, Leonard, and it'll probably launch into what you wanted to talk about watching, older stuff. And one of the main things that I do now, I still watch a lot of wrestling. I should make that clear. Even though I don't watch the current product as much, I still certainly keep an eye on what's going on. I'm aware of all the storylines. I keep it in the back of my head because the wrestling, and there at one point I didn't like when people compared it to a soap opera, but it really is one of those things where like if you stop watching cold for like a month, getting back into it, you're like, wait, what happened? Why is this person doing this? So I try to keep it fresh to a certain degree, but I watch a lot of older stuff. And why I watch a lot of older stuff is because I love the podcast that Conrad Thompson does. So if they review a show, say recently SummerSlam 2005 with Hogan and HBK, I will watch that show. Then I will listen to their podcast, and that's a fun routine for me to do. So that's a lot of times that's how I watch it. And a lot of the other bonus shows that are on the WWE Network, which to me is very well worth the money. And, I'm not trying to, they're not an advertiser on our show. Maybe you didn't know that, all 10 of you. But I watch a lot of the shows on there, Broken Skull Sessions, and, the new one, Timeline, is very good. Some of the documentaries they have a lot of great content on there that has little to do with the current product. And like, that's also the other part of it. It's like, okay, they have made this app so, loaded with wrestling content that a lot of it's much more interesting than the current stuff.
Well, here's the idea that I had today was the notion that if you look at other fandoms or say collecting hobbies, and I don't think a lot of people call wrestling a fandom, even though I think you can. I mean, it's not Harry Potter or Star Trek or Doctor Who, but I think you can still call wrestling a fandom. That in a lot of these other fandoms, there's like a hard line between the retro fan and the current fan. For example, video games. My sister's family, they have a PS4 and a Nintendo Switch. My brother-in-law is about my age. He still plays all the current games. He gets Madden Football, the new one every year when it comes out. My nephew, who is 8, is showing me Fortnite and was it Minecraft? I almost said Minesweeper. That's how old I am. Minecraft when I go over there. And,
you know, Pac-Man.
Yeah, I'm not into that. Although we did play some, they have like an old Nintendo like app or whatever that we played some of the stuff. He loves Double Dragon, by the way.
Let's say.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not into current video games, but I do like retro stuff. I collect for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. I watch YouTube videos and I read articles about old video gaming. I recently watched the Netflix documentary series on video game history. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. But I think in video games, there's that line, oh, I'm a gamer, but I'm a retro gamer, and how that's different and how that's okay. The other thing's comic books. I don't read anything current, but I still go into comic book stores from time to time. And I like to look around, and I'll pick up some trade paperbacks, or I'll go through the dollar boxes, and I'm picking up older stuff. It's stuff maybe I didn't know about, that I didn't see at the time or read at the time, but it interests me. It's older, and I get that. So I think from those two examples, you can see that there's a line between retro and current, and most people are okay with those in those fandoms. But you don't see that for wrestling. Kind of like what we talked about earlier, that you feel like this loyalty or this obligation to keep up with the current product if you call yourself a wrestling fan. And I think that has to do with the fact that wrestling still has some ties and some connotations to it on sports. There's still like the sports root, and there's ESPN Classic that shows old games, and there's people who, of course, say, oh, my favorite player is some retired guy who they grew up watching. But you don't have someone say, you know what, I'm a New England Patriots fan, but I don't like that Tom Brady stuff. I don't watch the Tom Brady stuff. I don't like the Super Bowls. I don't watch the Super Bowl stuff. I watched Drew Bledsoe era. I watched Steve Grogan era. I liked it when the mascot was the guy hiking the football. Like, nobody says that.
Right.
And I think that's the same connotation with wrestling, that people are the same way, that you're expected to keep up with the current product. But I think that's changing with a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And I would definitely say within the next few years, you're definitely going to see that harder line, like I talked about with video games and comic books, where, oh, I'm a retro fan. I like the 80s. I like the 90s. I like the Attitude Era. That's what I watch. That's what I'm into. And so you can still be a wrestling fan. I think we're both very much wrestling fans. I think anyone who watches any of our shows are going to get that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're disloyal or that you're out of it. If you're not watching the current product, you just like a certain kind, a certain brand, a certain era.
Right.
And defining that by timeline, I think is going to become a little more common. And again, I just don't think it's done right now because of that. That's still the connection to it being sort of a sport, People who watch football, hey, I'm a football fan. That means you watch current football. I'm an MMA fan. I'm a boxing fan. That means you watch current. So I think that's where wrestling is at. But especially as it drifts more and more away from being not just a sport, but sports entertainment. And, I keep using that fandom word, that I think is going to become more and more of a fandom, thought of as a fandom, than someone saying, hey, I don't watch the current product, but I got the network and I watch 80s WWF, I watch 90s WCW, whatever. That's going to become more common, I think, and I think it's going to become more accepted.
Right. And that's, what you were talking about is kind of the message that we want to convey here, that is, even if, if you're a wrestling fan that grew up and are around, the ages that we are, if you don't consume every single minute of the product, you can still call yourself a wrestling fan. I subscribe to the WWE Network. I also subscribe to Impact, oddly enough, and that is a terrible app, by the way. But that's another story. We are still very much wrestling fans. Hopefully you see that and hear that as you watch this show. And I was thinking as you were talking there, Leonard, that if you look at the fact that, people like you and I who grew up in the 80s and really enjoyed, either Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan, and then people like us, when we got older and the Attitude Era came, we wanted something different from the product. And the Attitude Era delivered that, and we were fans of Stone Cold and The Rock. And now I thought about the fact of what are the younger kids starting out their wrestling fandom with? Like, I feel like people like you and I who grew up with Flair and Hogan, it was so good and so must see that we carried that love and passion for wrestling well into our teenage and obviously now adult years, and I think that's where our loyalty grew, because we know how good it was and how good it can be. And, you'll hear people like Bruce Pritchard and other people talk about how the business goes in cycles. I'm anxious to see how that cycle comes back around to be popular again now, because sometimes you can see who some of the bright stars can be. And obviously there's a lot of talented guys in all of the companies. I wonder, though, who the next must-see star is, because if we don't have somebody like that somewhere soon, then I wonder, like the little kids who grew up liking somebody like John Cena, when those kids are teenagers, who is going to be there to bring them back to loving wrestling? Because there was always something that brought us back to it. I wonder if there isn't another person that they think, oh man, I used to watch wrestling as a kid. I love John Cena. I want to check out, Joe Schmo here. If that person doesn't exist, what then happens to the business, I wonder?
That's a very good question. And in my head, I can't really postulate a possibility right now, because even though we talk about how the product, at least for us, isn't engaging, the amount of wrestling that's out there is the biggest it's been since probably around 85, the end of the territory era. But while you're talking to, I wanted to ask, remind me, how old are your kids now?
I have twin girls that are 6 and a little boy who's 3.
Okay, have you watched any wrestling with them? Have you introduced any of it to them?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, my son is just now starting to watch it, and he'll every now and then he'll say, I want to watch WWF, because he'll hear me call it both things. And but the girls, when they hear me watching wrestling, it's usually a pay-per-view, and that's usually around their bedtime, if not past their bedtime. They'll venture out of their room and they'll try, and a lot of times they like to watch, the female wrestlers, because right now, and I agree with CM Punk, who said this many months ago, but he said a lot of the stuff when he got back into it, a lot of the great stuff was with the women, and I totally agree that like a lot of them are doing really great stuff right now. And so they love to watch. They loved Becky when she was around. They always would come in and watch Becky, and they watch Asuka as well. However, when The Fiend is on, they run the opposite way. Like, they do not like to watch The Fiend, but they do watch it from time to time. And I can see that, they might be fans in the making one day. Now, as they get older, obviously they're girls. Who knows where their likes will go, but they watch it with me from time to time.
I mentioned my sister's family, and she's got 4 kids, and the boy is 8, and then 3 girls who are 14, 16, and 18 now. The 18-year-old just went to college. And I would go over there for big events like WrestleMania and the Royal Rumble and Survivor Series and SummerSlam and watch that, with my brother-in-law, and they would watch it with us. And it was fun how sometimes they would get into different characters or different matches, and sometimes they would ask us questions like, why is that guy doing that, or what have you. I think we're going to do an episode at one point talking about our indie show experiences, going to indie shows. But the youngest girl, when she's 14 now, but when she was about 9 to 10, she wanted to go to indie shows with me. She knew I was going to shows, and she much preferred going to these local indie shows here in Ohio than sitting down and watching wrestling on TV. And I think it was the live experience of it. And just going out. And again, too, she likes live theater. I've taken her to like high school plays in the area because she wants to do that. But again, it was interesting to note. And one time WWE was going to be in Wheeling, which isn't too far of us, a house show. And I say, hey, do you want to go? And she wasn't really that interested in it. She was more interested in going to these small shows that we were going to. And, oddly enough, I'll finish up this tangent, it's funny. Her top 3 favorite wrestlers, one is a local Ohio indie guy named Matt Taylor. Shout out to him. He's a great local talent. Number 2 is a guy who we only know as Guy in a Hat. We were at a show, and the sound system was so terrible, we couldn't tell what they were saying. And this guy came in, and he was wearing like a top hat with feathers in it and stuff, and she loved him. And he didn't come out like for intermission, so we never saw the guy. We never got his name, but he's Guy in a Hat, and that's her second favorite wrestler. And her third favorite wrestler is someone that but you would never guess. It's Bobby Fulton. because he has a local indie show that he runs with his son out of Chillicothe, Ohio, and we've been to several of his shows, and she's talked with Bobby, and Bobby has talked to her, so she's got that personal connection with him, and because of that, I've shown her some of his early stuff on YouTube because I say, "Oh, hey, I watched him when I was growing up, when I was your age. That's who
Right.
this guy is," and shown her that. So she got interested in that because she got this personal experience to actually meet him. And while we're here, just a quick shout out to Bobby. I know he's battling cancer right now, and a huge shout out to him. And I know when we get to the indie show, talking about going to indie shows, that show, the episode we're going to do, that I'm going to be talking a lot about Bobby Fulton and his product, and but right now to give a big shout out to him.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, we wish him well for sure. And I think that we didn't really talk about like what show we like the most. And you had talked about how you're not really watching much current product, but
Right.
if there's like while I'm talking about which one I like the most, if you think of one that you like the most, let me know. And I think you already alluded to it, but
Okay.
I like I said, Monday for years has been a wrestling night for me. And, so although I watch Raw, I really don't think it's that great right now. Like, I really don't. I love Drew McIntyre. I'm glad he's on top, but Raw at 3 hours is bloated to the nth degree, and it is just not very engaging. I try to watch AEW when I can because that's a really good show. And a lot of times they really deliver quality matches on television in addition to having pay-per-views, and they don't have pay-per-views, it feels like, every other week, so it makes them more special in that way. And it also leads to probably a separate conversation about how wrestling might be a little oversaturated, to a certain extent. But I really do like AEW. I think that they highlight a lot of talent in really special ways. So if I had to list a show that I think has been consistently good in delivering, I would either say AEW or NXT, who both have been battling it out ratings wise, over the past several months. Although, in recent weeks, I know that AEW is winning that war. But both are really good shows. I tend to like the shows that are less theatrical and more about wrestling and let the talent really show their stuff in the ring. Whereas, as we talked about in our first episode of this show, a lot of the mainstream WWE shows, they really do feel like matches that are made by the same person every week, no matter who the talent is. So I will, certainly give a shout out to people at AEW. I think they're doing a great job. There's, in addition to the new talent, they also have that kind of classic vintage feel with Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross and Taz. So I really like that show. And I think you mentioned NWA Power, Leonard, but would that be your favorite, or is there something else?
Yeah, right. Again, as I said, I'm not really currently watching anything current. But when I was enjoying AEW just for the newness and the freshness of it. And I was enjoying NWA Power as well. And this may sound odd, but for the newness and freshness of that, it was a very retro, old school show. It's a studio show. It was done in a feel that reminded you a lot of the old NWA/WCW Saturday Night. Yeah, it was on TBS. I'm a Jim Cornette fan, so I like when Cornette was on the first season. I liked Stu Bennett on the second season. Um, I became a huge Nick Aldis fan from watching Power. He's fantastic. He's today's Ric Flair. Great promos, great in the ring. If someone would if WWE would ever give him a flyer, AEW ever give him a flyer, I think they could get a star out of him if they let him go. I liked Tim Storm. I liked that character. I liked a lot of just what they were doing in building characters through, like, it was match promo. It wasn't all these backstage vignettes and different things. And it was just a throwback for me. Again, it reminded me of my childhood. It reminded me of growing up watching Saturday Night. But I thought the talent was there too. Again, they had a very small roster, but I thought they had some interesting talents, especially Nick Aldis and especially Tim Storm. And they, of course, had some older Impact guys like Kenny Anderson and James Storm and some of those guys who I like as well. So at the time, I did get into NWA Power. And on the female side, I really like Thunder Rosa. I got into her as well. And again, they introduced me to some people who I didn't know about, Ricky Starks, who I know is working for AEW now, was on Power. And I really liked Ricky Starks. I was like, that's a guy, if someone gave him a chance and let him run, could do something. So that was really the last show that I was really into. That was the last appointment television for me. If I didn't watch it when it was live streaming, I usually watched it that night, or as soon as I could, because that was the show that was really engaging with me at the time.
And you were talking about the freshness of AEW, and I think just in general, like NWA Power, AEW, like they do offer a freshness. When WWE was competing with WCW, there was that drive, there was that passion where they kind of really, were going back and forth, and you really felt like you had to watch it. And I feel like a lot of the WWE product, because they are on top, and rightfully so, but it does feel complacent in many ways. And but whereas some of these other shows do feel fresh, and they do feel like they're interesting to watch. There's faces that you're not used to seeing, and if you disagree with us, please let us know. If you feel like we should be watching every day, let us
Or
know.
at least watching something.
Right. I watch a lot of other stuff too. I watch movies and TV shows, but and I feel like also the people our age, Leonard, are we are growing up. We have other responsibilities, which is I think also could probably go into some of the declining popularity. Because we expect when we do watch the product, we want something else out of it these days.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not necessarily delivering that. We're getting our fix of entertainment, whatever that may be, in other ways. But for Leonard, my name is Chad. And if you have any comments about this, please let us know. Let us know what your experiences are, how you keep up with the product. We'd love to hear from everybody out there. And we thank you for joining us. And please tune in next week. This is the Nitty Gritty. Have a great week.
Good night.